Hey guys, it's Ice again. Got a knife review for today on the Black Titan Dual Edge OTF. This is basically a very cheap copy of the Microtech Scarab. I'm going to go ahead and get through the stats real quick, then I'll get into my observations and recommendations. So the blade length is 3.3 inches. The handle is 5.2 inches. The handle thickness is ½ inch precisely. The blade thickness is 0.09 inches, a very thin blade. The blade shape is obviously a double sharpened spear point. The overall length is 8.375 inches, just like the traditional Scarab. It is a hollow ground blade, most likely of 440C or 8CR13. It is not listed, and the price on this is $29.94 from Lightning OTF Knives. Now I'm going to get into my observations on this knife. This actually isn't my knife. This is a friend of mine who lent it to me for sharpening and the review. And the first thing I noticed about it was its edge. I always go over the blade first, and this is a great place to start. Just take a look at how remarkably blunt this edge is. I'm not just talking about the sharpness. I'm talking about the edge angle. The edge angle is extremely important in a knife. If you take a look at that right there, that's like, oh my gosh, that's like approaching a 45-degree inclusive angle, which is ridiculous. That cannot even be classified as an edge. That's just a corner. And it's absolutely just crap dull. Like, there's no way you can cut yourself with this. You guys some perspective on just how dull this knife is. Here's the paper cut test. It is, if you really force it, it just tears before it even cuts. So, I mean, this thing is just crap dull. On top of that, it's not even that easy to sharpen. Because of how obtuse that edge angle is, that means there's a whole lot of steel directly behind the edge. So if you look at the space directly behind the edge, that's what a knife sharpener has to deal with when reprofiling, is grinding off the back of the edge. Now, to get this sharp, you would have to grind off so much steel that you might as well just do a full convex, because you're going to be extending these bevels so much just to get, I don't even think you'd be able to get to a 20-degree angle with this knife. I mean, you'd be coming all the way to the center, to the blade flats. And it's just ridiculous. This is probably the worst factory edge I have ever seen on any knife. And I'm a professional knife sharpener, so that's saying something. I've seen some pretty bad stuff. In knife sharpening, when a knife comes to me that is so dull that that has so much damage to it that it would cost more to grind off that much steel and sharpen it than the knife is worth, that's what I call a totaled knife. Sort of like a totaled car. If you get in a wreck and the cost to repair it is more than the car is worth. It's totaled. This is the first knife that I've ever seen that is totaled right out of the box. That is just so bad. I mean, just look at the angle of that edge. And even between that edge, you see that light coming off from the center of that edge. That's all dull steel. That's just flat steel. So it's not even a true corner. My buddy wanted me to sharpen this, preferably to shaving sharp. And I don't think he realizes just how insane that notion is, just how terrible the geometry of this is. That's like handing you a watermelon and telling you to turn it into a rifle. So yeah, I just wanted to show you guys just how bad this edge is. The rest of the knife really isn't all that bad. It is a double action OTF. It is directly mimicked after the Microtech Scarab, which is pretty sweet. It does have a decent kick to it. Now, I want to just take a closer look at the fit and finish of this blade, which, quite frankly, is also pretty bad. You can see the blade flats here are terribly asymmetrical. it almost looks like to prevent this blade flat from being coated, they just like, you know, threw some tape on there. Very, very crappy milling here. You can actually see the pieces of steel right there that's still present in the milling because they didn't mill it all the way through, and that's like a half circle right there. You can see right here there's a big non-centered scratch. I do not know what that's from, probably from the mechanics of the knife. When you look at the uncoated flats on either side, not only are they uneven symmetrically on the same face, they're actually not identical. So this one looks a little bit better than this side. This side, the tip of it comes much closer to the tip of the knife, whereas this side it's probably a solid 0.4 inches from the tip of the knife, whereas on this side it's maybe 0.2 inches, which is nuts that they have that huge of an error margin. Another thing I wanted to talk about with this knife is the grind. This grind is a very poorly done hollow grind. It's very indecisive. It's not very clear that it's a hollow grind. Like, you can see and feel that it's hollow, but it's a very shallow hollow grind. If you're going to make a hollow grind, make it noticeable, make it deep. That's sort of the purpose of the hollow grind, is to be thin behind the edge, but they made it ridiculously thick behind the edge, so it's pointless to have a hollow grind now. This is quite possibly one of the worst cutters I've ever seen, because it's thick behind the edge and it's thick behind the face. It's thick everywhere, except for where it matters most, which is structural stability, and it's thin in that regard. So this has got to be one of the worst blade geometries I've ever seen, which is shocking, given the fact that they were trying to mimic the Microtech Scarab, which is a great success in blade geometry. Now, one thing that this knife actually is good for from the factory, no, it's not cutting, it's piercing. That's because this has a very acute point on it. Has a pretty decent tip. It's definitely not needle sharp. I've seen much better, but it's sort of the only thing that is sharp on this knife is the tip. And this would do puncturing very well. Now, this coating is also really bad. I've noticed it wants to sort of mimic the feel of a DLC, but I can absolutely assure you it is not a DLC by any means. These scratches you see here, that was cutting through one piece of cardboard. One tiny little piece. Now, to give you some perspective, an actual DLC looks more like this, and this is after cutting through, let's say, I don't know, 500 pieces of cardboard. Is that much damage? Whereas with this coating, one piece of cardboard does that, all this to it. So it's a very cheap coating. You can actually rub it with your fingernail and see a little bit of black on your nail. So this coating is not going to last, but not to worry, it is most definitely a stainless steel. There is no way in heck that they would actually make a knife this cheap with a carbon steel. You're not that lucky. So my guess is, looking at a bunch of the other knives on their page, this is probably 440C if you're lucky. If it's not 440C, it's probably going to be something like 8CR13 or 8CR13MO. Both of those are pretty cheap budget steels. Neither is going to hold an edge very well, but it doesn't even have an edge to hold, so you don't really have to worry about that anyway. Anyway, enough ripping on the blade. It is a very sick looking knife. If you're a huge fan of the Microtech look, of the Microtech aesthetic, I think you're going to like this knife. Granted, it is not anywhere close to the level of fit and finish of Microtech's or reliability. We'll get into that later. Now, one thing that I love about this knife in particular over the other OTF, the drop point blade, is that this actually utilizes the OTF's great affordance, and that is having a double-edged knife on a basically a pocket knife. I know a lot of you have probably seen Nut and Fancy's video on lightning OTFs. He tells you to buy 10 of these. He actually had a different knife in his video, and I believe that one is single-edged. It is double action, but it's silver. It's not a copy of the Scarab, and it is much more reliable. I'd say if you want an OTF, a cheap OTF for functionality, for utility, I'd say definitely go with the one featured in Nut and Fancy's video. I think this is by Titan OTF knives. It's just sold by Lightning OTF. So this is technically, I think, a different company that makes this. The other sign of really poor quality that you can see on this knife is that their logo is nowhere. If they're unwilling to mark their own knives, that probably means they're ashamed of their product, and quite frankly they should be. If you just look at the horrible grinding, horrible blade geometry, and very cheap coating and very cheap steel, bad milling job, whole lot of blade play. I mean, it's loose. There's more blade play on this knife than I've seen in any other knife. Granted, OTFs have to have a little bit of blade play. Even Microtechs have some blade play, but not this much. And that brings me to locking mechanism and the OTF mechanism. The OTF mechanism actually isn't all that bad. It is a little bit unreliable. Sometimes it will, I'd say like 1 out of every 25 times, it will misfire. So you push it all the way forward and it'll come forward maybe a centimeter, and you have to pull the blade out, retrack it, and then spring it back in. Now that's sort of a good thing though, that when it does misfire, it's not something that you have to take apart the knife to fix. You can just retrack it, which really isn't all that big of a deal. However, I would say just because of that alone, don't use this as a tactical knife. If this is something that you're looking into for your own protection or for offensive use, something where your life is depending on it, I mean, a 1 out of 25 chance misfire, that's some pretty bad chances to bet your life on. So I would not recommend getting this knife for anything that will be serving as protection. Now, the mechanism actually is pretty fast. It's not very strong. It does stop very easily. Now, to show you that, I'm going to try to fire it through this piece of paper, and you'll see what happens. It doesn't go all the way through. You see right there, it doesn't fire fully. And this is what happens when the blade misfires. It sort of just becomes loose like this. And it does this on its own sometimes without the use of without anything blocking it. It just becomes loose like this. It misfires. So to fix this, you just pull it all the way out, pull it like that to retract it, and it locks it. It clicks in, and then you can retract it back into the handle, and then it should work fine from there. Now, even when you have the paper spaced out a little bit to give it some momentum, it still misfires. And this is just paper. This isn't cardboard. This isn't wood. I mean, it misfires on paper, so it's a pretty weak mechanism. Granted, it's fast, and that's all you really need to do. I mean, the mechanism isn't meant to push through anything. This is just something to test just how strong this mechanism is. I want to talk about the handle a little bit. I believe this handle is cheap aluminum. It has this grip tape in here, but it's recessed, so it doesn't really give you any actual grip, and it's a very fine grip tape, which sort of sucks because you need a bit more grip than this. However, it is kind of nice that they had this rather than just having smooth aluminum. Now, another nice thing about this knife is that, unlike Microtech, all of the hardware, it is standard hardware. So you're not going to have to worry about buying a special tool just to disassemble your knife. However, I would not recommend disassembling an OTF if you don't know what you're doing. It's just a mess of springs in there. I want to talk about the ergonomics of this knife. It's a pretty good ergonomic design, and the reason for that is that it's not their design. It's the Scarab's design. The Microtech Scarab has a really nice handle. This this trigger sort of works like a thumb ramp, and it works quite well. And it does have a little bit of an upsweep right here to give a little bit more resistance from your hand going up onto the blade. It does have a tiny little bit of jimping right there. Has a decent amount of jimping that is actually decently effective. Steps on this trigger. And then it has just sort of miscellaneous jimping along the handle. Besides that, one thing that really bothers me about this handle is the pocket clip. I absolutely hate this pocket clip. Not the design of the pocket clip. I think Microtech's initial design of having this divot right there is quite brilliant, and it offers very good retention. But the execution of this company's pocket clip is just really bad. Notice it's not centered. It doesn't come straight down this smoother part of the handle. That's the first thing. The second thing is it has horrible, absolutely horrible, awful retention. Normally there's a gap right here. You can actually see a gap between, just while in resting, not while holding it up. You can actually see a gap between the clip and the body of the knife, which is really bad. That marks really bad retention. It's not going to be clipping down very hard. The third thing that's really bad about this pocket clip is that on top of having bad retention, it comes down on a smooth part of the handle. Now, I've always been a proponent of a pocket clip coming down on a grippy part of the handle, because that offers very good retention. And so the fourth thing that is really bad, and probably the worst thing about this pocket clip, is how easily it comes loose. Now, this is a deep carry pocket clip, which is nice. There is something good about it, but it comes loose very, very easily. And to show you that, this glass breaker is the bolt holding it on, just like the Microtech design. And it does have a little bit of retention, a little bit of play as well, though, while it's tightened down. But then I'm just going to fire the knife 3 or 4 times, and already it's loose. Just by the firing of the knife. It can't even function on its own without breaking down, without entropy occurring. So I would recommend, if you're going to get this knife and you're going to carry it, I'd recommend bending this pocket clip down so that it has more retention force, and just absolutely drenching this nut in Loctite. Just really glue it in place, because it is not going to hold. I mean, it doesn't tighten down well. But there is something good about this pocket clip, and that's the fact that it is a deep carry pocket clip. I've always been a proponent of deep carry pocket clips, and no, it's not because I want to be super secret spy. It's because it's functional. It's because it keeps the body of the knife, the weight of it, down lower, and it's safer for carry. It's less likely to fall out of your pocket, and it just looks a lot nicer. I know everyone knows it's a knife, but the knife looks nicer when you don't see the butt end of it sticking out of your pocket. Now, just between the gap in the pocket clip, the smooth surface right here, and the play in the pocket clip, I would not trust this knife whatsoever for carrying. I've lost way too many knives to terrible retention pocket clips. That is an absolute deal breaker for me. I would not carry this knife. However, as a novelty, this is awesome, because it is the same design as the Microtech Scarab. If you don't have $600 to drop on a brand new Microtech Scarab off the forums or Blade HQ or something like that, or Arizona Customs, then you can just get a copy like this. Something that's fun to, it's a tactical knife, basically. It's something that's just fun to flick out and marvel at. Now, granted, this has nowhere near, not even the same universe as Microtech's fit and finish, so bear that in mind. Now I'd like to talk about the travel on this switch, this trigger here. The travel, it's a bit late of a firing mechanism, which is a good thing. There's a lot of travel, so that means it's very safe. However, it's uneven. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Watch very carefully where it fires. Right there, right about at that unfortunate piece of metal sludge that is another mark of terrible fit and finish. Now on the way back, watch where it fires. We'll do it again. Watch closely. Watch where it fires. It's about at that metal sludge. That's about that mark, that first step line right there. Whereas on the way back, you see that? Almost all the way back and it's still not firing. And that's the firing point. So the firing point here is right about there where my fingernail is. The firing point up here is right about there where my fingernail is. So it fires earlier going out than it does going in, which I think is very bad. If you're going to have one be later than the other, you want the going out to be later than the going in, because going out is what you don't want to happen accidentally when it's in your pocket. So that's just sort of another mark of bad fit and finish, bad mechanism quality. But that being said, this is a $30 knife. I mean, I know I've been giving it a lot of crap, but it's $30, and quite frankly, for $30, this is a great deal. I mean, you can see why so many people spend so much money on Microtechs. It's because if you're going to get an OTF that you want to be reliable and of good steel and of good fit and finish, you've got to pay big bucks. Just because OTFs are very difficult knives to make well. And so if you want an OTF, if all you really want is an OTF, you don't necessarily need a good steel and good fit and finish, then something like the dual edge Titan is going to be a great option for you. It does have a nice little lanyard hole here, and I'll show you guys. You can actually take off this pocket clip. It's basically just a hole in the piece of metal right there, and it's just a threaded nub of metal off the end of the spike of the glass breaker. Now another thing I want to talk about with this glass breaker is that it's really not a great glass breaker. It's not going to be super reliable, and the reason for that is the support. Now if you look at that, it's got a seam right there, so that's going to be cracking or getting larger when there's a significant amount of force put on this. And I know a lot of people think you just need a point for a glass breaker, but that's not true. From my own experience, I can tell you, you need more than just a sharp point to break glass. You need something that is very, very sturdy. Something like this. This is the Benchmade Triage, by the way, that I keep referencing. If you just take a look at this, it's got a breaker steel that has 2 body screws in it. 2 body screws in the breaker steel alone. And then on top of that, if you take a look right there, right here, there's the metal of the breaker steel actually lips over the liners, so that when there's immense force coming down on that breaker steel, it's going to be supported not only by the body screws, but also by the actual liners, which are fully supported up here. So the entire knife is taking the force. Whereas, with something like this, all that's really taking the force is this little plate right here. And it's very poorly transferred into the rest of the knife. So I could easily see this seam coming loose. I could easily see that cracking. And I mean, these body screws just really aren't super substantial. Considering how easily this piece comes loose, actually I can feel it right now. These body screws are loose. I can feel the play. You can see it as well in the top plate here. I mean, I've done barely anything with this knife. Just basically been firing it. I've used it once to cut through one piece of cardboard, and already the top plate, even with 6 body screws, the top plate is loose. So I just wanted to show you guys. I think it's a great deal, but don't be fooled. This is absolutely not the same thing as a Microtech Scarab. It's a great deal, but just don't expect anything awesome in terms of quality. It's a fun little knife. It's a cool novelty little knife. Would I use it for utility? No. For a number of reasons. It's not sharp, it's incapable of getting sharp, and it can't cut because of a thick edge and a bad hollow grind. This would just be a very bad cutter in general. Now if you full convexed it and spent a whole lot of money full convexing this, it would be an excellent cutter. But you would end up spending more money on all that equipment that you wore down convexing it than the knife would be worth. Would I recommend this for tactical use? Absolutely not. Poor retention here, it's probably not even going to be there when you need it. Just really unreliable mechanism. It misfires frequently. I'm actually very surprised it didn't happen once yet in this video. But it misfires relatively frequently. And of course it's very dull. You usually want tactical knives to be very, very sharp. But if you're looking for a knife that is just really cool to have, like your first OTF, just to sort of get the concept of what an OTF is, what it does, this is a great knife to have. It's a great knife to, flip out, while you're just, watching a movie or hanging out or whatever. It's a great knife to, show the guys, to impress or whatever. It's a cool little knife, but definitely not for anything serious or for anything fine. Now, disclaimer before I end the video, I'd say definitely check your local knife laws. I know in many states this is not only illegal to carry, it's illegal to own any automatic knife like this. So definitely read up on that before you get yourself in serious trouble. Now I'd also like to point out that this switch does even have a little bit of travel other than the travel. It's sort of a loose switch. Something to point out. But anyway, this is the Black Titan dual edge OTF knife, sold from Lightning OTF Knives for $29.94 with free shipping in the USA. This has been Ice. Thanks for listening, guys. Please comment, rate, and subscribe.